Hey everyone, I'm Nathan Urben and I'm a horticulturist at the Missouri Botanical Garden. I'm in my home garden and today I'll be talking to you about perennial flowering vines. So I love vines. I have several of them in my garden. They're really a great way to add a nice vertical feature in your garden. They're also really good at hiding areas you don't want to look at, like your neighbor's trash cans or if there's an unsightly corner in your backyard. It's a really great way to use them. Something to think about too is that they're also really great for fitting in small spaces because they take up a very small footprint since they're growing more up than out. Another thing to consider is how the plant climbs. All vines don't grow the same way. Some grow by tendrils, some grow by like aerial rootlets, some grow by twining their stems around the support, and then others grow kind of by like their foliage kind of twining around the support too. So also take that into account. Also consider the structure you're going to put it on and make sure that's a nice sturdy structure. If it's a vine that gets heavy, like Wisteria can get pretty heavy, think about putting it on a nice sturdy pergola. Also think about, is that support compatible with the vine that you've chosen? And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. So with that, I will take you on a little tour of my garden and show you some of my favorite vines and how to grow them. So this is the first vine I'm going to talk about today. This is Major Wheeler honeysuckle, or Lonicera sepervirens, or it's also commonly known as your trumpet honeysuckle vine. As you can see, it has these kind of trumpet or tubular kind of coral scarlet flowers on it. Blooms heavily April into May, and then it blooms off and on throughout the entire growing season, which is nice. If you want hummingbirds in your garden, this is the great vine to choose. They love this vine. This is on the south-facing side of my house, so this gets full sun. Hummingbirds are added like every 5 minutes in the summer. They love this. It's semi-evergreen too, which is nice because you'll have foliage in the winter, but it also is nice for providing cover for birds that are trying to nest. I have one already in the vine right now. I think it's a grackle nest that's in here. So this vine is really tolerant of full sun, high heat, humidity conditions. Doesn't seem to phase it at all. It's also, this variety in particular is very powdery mildew resistant. I haven't even noticed any powdery mildew on like the 6 or 7 years I've had it. Nice vigorous twining vine, give it a sturdy support. I have it on a little trellis here, but we have it kind of rigged on a string that's kind of attached to the two windows here to kind of create some privacy and some shade in the summertime. I recommend going out and buying it. You're not going to be disappointed by this vine. And this is another neat vine. This is climbing hydrangea, or Hydrangea petiolaris variety anomala. This is the only vining type hydrangea there is. The rest of them are all shrubs. This one can get to be fairly tall. I would say 20-30 feet tall. This is a type of vine that climbs by aerial rootlets, so there's like little suction cups that suction cup the vine to its support. I wouldn't recommend putting this on a brick building because it can damage that surface. Here I have it growing on a cottonwood tree that's in my side yard, and it's doing fairly well. It's probably about 15-20 feet tall right now. My side yard, by the way, gets morning sun, early afternoon sun, and then it's shaded the rest of the day. So that's really what this vine likes. It needs a little bit of afternoon shade to do well. The flowers on this species, let's talk about those. They have a center that has fertile flowers on it, and this is not a good example because it's already kind of past its blooming stage. But these would be all kind of white and fluffy. And the sterile flowers are the little bracts that are formed around the outside edge of the flower itself. And it forms kind of a nice lace cap effect. And usually this thing is covered with flowers, and this year I had a pretty good year. Climbing hydrangea is one of those plants you have to be patient with because it takes a fair amount of time for it to come to maturity and to flower really well. This vine is probably like 5 to 7 years old, and it's finally getting in stride with its flowering ability. So just be patient with it. It will happen. It just takes a while. Another great vine that kind of is underutilized. I'm not quite sure how to plant it. So like I said, putting it on a support that's strong, that you don't mind it growing on. So maybe not planting on a house, putting it on an old tree or a structure that you don't care too much about. It does grow out. It kind of grows like poison ivy does. As it gets taller, the stems want to grow horizontal. So just keep that in mind. It's really an elegant vine at maturity, so go ahead and try planting it. People are going to be stunned by how beautiful it is when it's in full flower. This is another vine I really like. This one is Goldflame honeysuckle vine, or Lonicera xheckroty. This is a hybrid honeysuckle vine between two different species. As you can see, the flower buds are really a nice bright pink, and the interior of the flowers, if you can see, is a nice tangerine orange color. This year it is loaded with flowers. It's just loving life, very vigorous. Give it a nice support to grow on. It's a twining vine just like the other honeysuckle vine I talked about. Likes full sun. Hummingbirds love this vine. Definitely one to plant against like a nice tall wall or large pergola. Go out and get it. It's great. And this is another vine that I really like. This is Amethyst Falls Wisteria, or Wisteria frutescens. This is your Kentucky or American Wisteria. As you can see, the flowers are a nice lavender, blue, purple color. They're 3 to 4 inches long. They're much shorter than the Asian varieties. And those varieties I do not recommend planting. They are escaping from cultivation. They have invaded natural habitats. So please do not buy or plant those. Those are ruining our environment. This is a much more well-behaved variety. It's still a very strong, vigorous grower. It will get to be about 20-30 feet tall. It requires full sun, well-drained soils. As far as planting companions go, you have infinite possibilities there. Here at home, I have it with my Orange Dream, Japanese Maple, Sun King Array. I have some blue irises in front of that. Gold foliage plants look really well with the flower, go really well with the flower color on this vine. This is a twining vine and needs a very strong, sturdy support. I have it growing on what I call my pergola, which really is just a big extended trellis that my partner built me. Another variety that is really good is Blue Moon. This one, they're both pretty similar. So please go out, find these in their nursery. They're excellent plants. Go ahead and give them a try. So this is the next set of vines I want to talk about. This is one of my favorites. This is Clematis, or Clematis, if you're from Great Britain. That's how they pronounce it over there. It's the queen of flowering vines, as they say, and for good reason. There's hundreds of varieties on the market. There's large flowered varieties, there's small flowered ones, there's ones that climb, there's some that don't climb, which are more like your herbaceous perennial types. There's some that are more bell-shaped, there's some that are single-flowered, and some that are double-flowered varieties. The flower range is usually in the pink, purple, blue, white range, but there are yellow flowered varieties too. How do you grow clematis? I recommend planting them so that their tops are in full sun to part shade, and then their roots are in shade and are in moist conditions. So tops in sun, roots in shade is usually the general rule I go by. When I'm planting clematis, if it's a large flowered variety, and this only applies for large flowered varieties, I always plant them a little deep so that there's at least 2 sets of nodes that are below the soil line. And that's really just an insurance policy, because sometimes the large flowered varieties can get what's called clematis wilt, which is a fungal disease which plugs up the vascular tissues of the plant. And by planting it deep, you're giving yourself a couple nodes where if it does suffer from wilt, you can cut it back to the ground, and usually you'll get some regrowth at the base, and you're not losing your entire plant. So that's just one way I typically plant those. The small flower varieties, you don't have to do that with. They're usually pretty resistant. But to talk about this vine right here in front of me, this one's called Pink Champagne. It's a large, early flowered variety. The flowers on this particular variety are a nice medium pink with kind of pale pink bars that run down the length of the tepals, or the petals as you call them. This one will get 6 to 8 feet tall if it's climbing up something. Here, it's hard to tell from the video, but I actually have it planted on top of this retaining wall. It's kind of a nice way to show that you don't necessarily have to have clematis growing up something. Sometimes you can have them trail down and serve as a ground cover or a trailing accent in your garden. And the way we did this was we planted it, and then as it started to grow in the spring, we just kind of gently pressed the stems down to kind of train them over the wall. Just kind of a nice, interesting way to train clematis. And I'll show you some more ways I do it here in my own garden with some of the next vines I'm going to talk about. So this is one of my favorite large flower clematis varieties. This is Bourbon. As you can see, the flowers are large. They're about 6 inches in diameter. The flower color is kind of a nice, rich ruby red around the margins, and it's got a nice central band of medium pink in the center, and the stamens are white, which is the male part of the flowers, which are in the center of the flower. This is on what I call my pergola. It's really just a long extended trellis that my partner built, and I have vines planted on each one of the 4x4 posts, because I love clematis and I love vines in general. But so yeah, this one is, like I said, is really a nice variety. It breeds really well from a distance. It'll get 6 to 8 feet tall. It's always one of the first clematis to bloom in my garden here at home. As far as companions I have it with variegated Solomon seal, Hydrangea macrophylla, hosta, astilbe, and then I have my ostrich ferns in the background. One other thing I want to mention about clematis in general is that they're kind of unique among vines in that they don't have tendrils, they don't twine around their support. What they have are modified leaves, so the leaves themselves wrap around their support. And now, why is that important? Well, you need to make sure you're matching the climbing mechanism, like I mentioned earlier, with the support you're going to put it on. So as here, you can't really see it because the vine is sort of camouflaging it pretty well, but I have green coated wire that it's wrapping around, so it's a narrow diameter wire. So things like fishing line works really well, wire, jute twine, all work really well for clematis. You can use chicken wire if you like. So just keep in mind matching the way that the vine climbs with the support you're going to put it on. And this is another clematis variety that's pretty neat. This one is Clematis Crystal Fountain. As you can see, the flower color is kind of like a nice lilac blue color. Most of these paler flower clematis, I recommend planting them in a little bit of shade, part to filter sunlight. They really do the best. If you put them in full sun, the color washes out, so put them in a little bit of shade to help preserve that flower color as much as possible. This variety is unique in that, as you can see, it has like this ring of fluffy, bristly little pieces of the flower, and those are actually petals. They're not part of like the stamens or the male part of the flowers, and it kind of gets the name crystal fountain because those are it looks kind of fountain-like, I guess. Just a really interesting, beautiful selection that's worth planting. This will get 6 to 8 feet tall. It's happy. I have it planted in my side yard, so this gets lots of morning sun and shade in the afternoon, so it likes that. I have it kind of planted with my Golden Jewel yew, which comes out, and it's a bright golden yellow during the growing season, so the colors go really well with each other, and with the orange fence I have it with. One other thing I want to mention too is that if you look at this flower, you can see that the edges of the petals or all eaten up by something. That's all slug damage. So just like most clematis and other plants in general, they are susceptible to slugs. Slugs are a nocturnal insect. They come out at night. They hide during the day underneath organic matter such as mulch, or in some cases clay pots. So the one organic way to get rid of them is to bury a shallow pan of stale beer in the ground. They're attracted to it. They'll fall in. They'll drown. That's one way to take care of them. You can also buy slug baits at the local hardware store too. That'll work. So watch for slugs on your clematis. Plant Crystal Fountain is an excellent variety for kind of a partly shaded area. So this is the next clematis I want to talk about. This is Samaritan Joe. As you can see, the flower color is white and has a thin purple line around each of the petals. So it's a really pretty selection. I have this one growing not on a trellis, not on an obelisk or an arbor of any sort. Instead, I have it growing directly on my Wine and Roses Weigela, which is a nice spring blooming shrub, hot pink flowers, burgundy foliage. And it goes to show you that you don't have to grow clematis on a man-made support. You can grow them through or on other plants, which is really kind of a neat idea. As you can see, I have the Weigela here kind of paired against my mellow yellow spirea, which is a nice foliage plant with fine, feathery, willow-like foliage, bright gold color. It really contrasts well with the Weigela. I kind of paired the clematis with this Weigela because I liked the interplay between the flower color on the clematis with the foliage of the Weigela. I just thought that the combination was really appealing. This clematis doesn't get very big. It gets 3 to 4 feet tall, maybe. And that's important, and that brings me to my next point. As far as planting and growing clematis on other plants, make sure that you're picking a clematis whose vigor is compatible with the plant support you're putting it on, whether it be a tree, shrub, or vine. You just want to make sure that you're not shading out the plant support you have it on. Sometimes if you're putting a super vigorous vine, some of them can get pretty tall and bushy. They can shade out that tree or shrub or vine you have it on, and that plant will sometimes winter kill. Come and you'll see it in the springtime. So just keep that in mind. The other thing I want to mention about clematis in general is about pruning. Clematis can fall into one of three categories: 1, 2, and 3. So pruning type 1, you don't really have to worry about in St. Louis climate. Those are more your evergreen types, or ones that are more that are not cold hardy, or just don't tolerate our heat, one of those three things. So you don't really have to worry about pruning type 1. Pruning type 2 are ones that bloom on old wood in spring, and then they'll bloom again in the late summer on new wood. And those you just trim lightly back to a few pairs of strong, healthy buds, leaving a lot of the stem tissue on because you want that stem tissue to provide nice new flower buds for that season. Pruning type 3 are usually a lot of your small blooming varieties are pruning type 3, and those you cut back to about 12 to 18 inches, leaving a few strong pairs of buds down low, and those will bloom on new wood and look really gorgeous and kind of early midsummer. But this Clematis Samaritan Joe is a pruning type 2, so I didn't prune this one super heavily, and as you can see, it's rewarded me with a lot of really great flower buds and flowers, and it looks stunning against the foliage of the Weigela. And that's all you really kind of need to know about growing clematis on other plants. This is another great variety. This one is Cardinal Wyszynski. This is considered a small flowered hybrid, but the flowers on this one are probably about 3 to 4 inches wide, so they're a decent size. They have kind of white centers to the flowers. And this one is just loaded with flowers this year. This loving life. I have this growing in full sun on my Moongate arbor in my backyard. Loves it. It flowers sort of late, like most of the small flowered varieties do. Would look really nice with, I don't know, either a white or another like purple flowering variety with it. Or you could try growing it through like a dark foliage plant like some of the purple red buds or your black lace elderberry would look great with it. Go out and get it. It's another great variety. This is another clematis that's really a nice variety. This is called Betty Corning. As you can see, the flowers on this one are kind of a nice lavender blue, and they're sort of bell-shaped, and the flower petals kind of reflex backwards on themselves. It's a small flower variety. Each flower is probably about 1.5 inches, 2 inches wide, but they're born in such a great profusion all over the vine. This vine actually is a little past peak. It lost a lot of its initial flowers, but it's still got a lot on it. I have this growing in my side yard, so it gets morning sun, early afternoon sun, and then gets shade the rest of the day, which is good. As you can see here, this is kind of growing on my golden jewel yew, and it just kind of looks really nice with it, I think. But I mean, just think about that when you're trying to pair it with something, as far as combinations, pairing it with something that's kind of a nice contrasting color like this, or going darker and putting it on a dark foliage plant with a purple flowering clematis with a darker color would look really nice. And this is a small flowered variety of clematis. This one's called Purpurea plena elegans, or PPE for short. This one is kind of like as you can see, it's sort of like a kind of magenta, purplish, kind of a dusty rose color. It's kind of got a double flower or semi-double flower to it. The flowers themselves are probably about 2.5 inches wide. It's a very vigorous selection. You can kind of see it kind of is flowering kind of all the way up my little moongate arbor here. It's one of my favorites actually. It's just sort of unique. It forms like a nice bower of flowers all the way up. So if you want something that's really a nice vigorous blooming variety, this is it. It blooms later than some of the larger ones, so that's another nice thing about it. One thing I want to mention about this variety that I learned just recently is that sometimes in the spring, if our spring is really cold or there's not enough light, sometimes the petals, as you can see here, kind of had a little green on them. And that's normal. That's not sort of a disease. It's more of a disorder. As the flowers are developing in the spring, they just don't have what they need to develop properly. So usually the later flowers will form normally, and most of the ones on the vine right now are normal. So it's nothing to worry about. Again, another great variety if you want something that's going to be really tall and vigorous. This is a good one to go with. And this is another clematis variety I like. This one is called Blue Angel. It's a small flowered variety. The flowers are probably about 3-4 inches wide. They're kind of crimped and curled along the edges. The flower center is white or kind of a cream color. It's a nice, vigorous, and very floriferous selection of Clematis viticella hybrid. It would look really wonderful with a dark purple flowered clematis variety like Jackmanii. Jackmanii superba will look awesome with it because they sort of would bloom at the same time. This one will get to be about 10-12 feet or taller. Just an excellent variety. If you're a beginner at growing clematis, I would start with something like this. As far as other planting companions that aren't clematis, I have a lily with it. This one's called Tiger Babies. It's kind of a nice salmon color with it. And underneath that I have caramel heuchera and have big leaf hydrangea, which hasn't started blooming yet. So just an excellent variety if you want just an easy clematis to grow that's not super demanding. Start with one of these. And this is another clematis variety I really like. This one is called Etoile Violette. It's a small flowered variety. As you can see, the flowers are kind of a violet purple color. They're about 2.5, 3 inches wide. They have white centers to them. This is a taller vine. It probably gets to be about 10, 12 feet or taller. The one thing I like best about it is that it's a very reliable bloomer. It gets tons of flowers every year like clockwork. That's why I highly recommend this one to beginning gardeners getting into clematis. It's just a very easy one to grow. How I would use this vine: grow it on a lighter background if possible, or with a white variegated shrub against it or growing on it. Or you could use a lighter flower clematis like Blue Angel, like I covered, blooms about the same time, so those two would look really nice together, or a white flower variety would look good with it. Again, you can't go wrong with this variety. Go out and find it and plant it. You won't be disappointed. And this is the last clematis I want to talk about. If I had to choose just one variety, this would be it. It's called Venosa violacea. It's a small flowered variety in the Viticella group of clematis, so it's a pruning type 3 clematis, so you're pruning this one hard back to the ground to about 12 to 18 inches. As you can see, the flower color on this variety is a nice purple with a white central band that runs the length of the petals. This one will get to be about 10, 12 feet tall. It's a really vigorous and really floriferous variety. Excellent. As far as planting companions go, I have it with my incredible hydrangea, which is a smooth hydrangea, which blooms about the same time. I just like how the flower color of the hydrangea kind of combines really well with the white central bar and the flowers of the clematis. I also have it with my blue shadow fothergilla, which has white bottle brush-like flowers in springtime, and this blue, kind of chalky blue foliage this time of the year. And then I also have Renu High Pearls Hypericum with the yellow flowers, which combines pretty well with the purple flowers and the clematis. So just something to think about. An excellent variety, like I said. Go out and find it. It's definitely worth adding to your garden. Well, I hope I've inspired you to add a few flowering vines to your garden. Check out your local garden center to see what plants they have in stock, and always be curious to try new varieties, because you can only learn and grow as a gardener when you try new things. Brushwood Nursery is a really great supplier of clematis varieties, but they carry other varieties as well. The Kemper Center for Home Gardening's website is a really great source of information that covers a lot of the topics I talked about today. As always, happy gardening.